The grand old trout. I saw a trout that I have known for a long time watching the tomb being put in. It was the grand old trout, raised as a fingerling in the trout hatchery at Ideth. I knew this because he had the little Ideth bell fastened to his jaw. He's many years old and weighs many pounds and moves slowly with wisdom. The grand old trout usually spends all of its time upstream by the statue of mirrors. I had spent many hours in the past watching this trout in the deep pool there. I guess he had been curious about this particular tomb and had come down to watch it being put in. I wondered about this because the grand old trout usually shows very little interest in watching the tombs being put in. I guess because he's seen so many before. I remember once they were putting in a tomb just a little ways down from the statue of mirrors, and he didn't move an inch in all the days that it took because it was such a hard tomb to put in. The tomb collapsed just before completion. Charlie came down and shook his head sadly, and the tomb had to be done all over again. But now the trout was watching very intently this tomb being put in. He was hovering just a few inches above the bottom and 10 feet away from the shaft. I went down and crouched by the river. The trout were not scared at all by the closeness of my appearance. The grand old trout looked over at me. I believe he recognized me, for he stared at me for a couple of minutes, and then he turned back to watching the tomb being put in, the final inlay work being done. I stayed there for a little while by the river, and when I left not to go to my shack, the grand old trout turned and stared at me. He was still staring at me when I was gone from sight. Book 2, inBOIL. 9 things. It was good to be back at my shack, but there was a note on the door from Margaret. I read the note, and it did not please me, and I threw it away, so not even time could find it. I sat down at my table and looked out the window down to Ideth. I had a few things to do with pen and ink, and did them rapidly and without mistake, and put them away, written in watermelon seed ink, upon these sheets of sweet-smelling wood made by Bill down at the shingle factory. Then I thought that I would plant some flowers out by the potato statue. A bunch of them in a circle around that 7-foot potato would look nice. I went and got some seeds from the chest that I keep my things in, and noticed that everything was ajar, and so before planting the seeds, I put everything back in order. I have 9 things, more or less. A child's ball, I can't remember which child, a present given me 9 years ago by Fred, my essay on weather, some numbers, 1 to 24, an extra pair of overalls, a piece of blue metal, something from the Forgotten Works, a lock of hair that needs washing. I kept the seeds out because I was going to put them in the ground around the potato. I have a few other things that I keep in my room at Ideth. I have a nice room there off toward the trout hatchery. I went outside and planted the seeds around the potato and wondered again who liked vegetables so much. And where were they buried? Under what river? Or had a tiger eaten them a long time ago when the tiger's beautiful voice had said, "I like your statues very much, especially that rutabaga by the ballpark." But alas. Margaret, again, again, again. I spent a half an hour or so pacing back and forth on the bridge, but I did not once find that board that Margaret always steps on. That board she could not miss if all the bridges in the world were put together, formed into one single bridge. She'd step on that board. A nap. Suddenly I felt very tired and decided to take a nap before lunch and went into the shack and lay down in my bed. I looked up at the ceiling, at the beams of watermelon sugar. I stared at the grain and was soon fast asleep. I had a couple of small dreams. One was about a moth. The moth was balanced on an apple. Then I had a long dream, which was again the history of inBOIL and that gang of his, and the terrible things that happened just a few short months ago. Whiskey. inBOIL and that gang of his lived in a little bunch of lousy shacks with leaky roofs near the Forgotten Works. They lived there until they were dead. I think there were about 20 of them, all men like inBOIL that were no good. First, there was just inBOIL who lived there. He got in a big fight one night with Charlie and told him to go to hell, and said he would sooner live by the Forgotten Works than in Ideth. To hell with Ideth, he said, and went and built himself a lousy shack by the Forgotten Works. He spent his time digging around in there and making whiskey from things. Then a couple of other men went and joined up with him, and from time to time, every once in a while, a new man would join them. You could always tell who they would be. Before they joined inBOIL's gang, they would always be unhappy and nervous and shifty, or have light fingers and talk a lot about things that good people did not understand, nor wanted to. They would grow more and more nervous and no account And then finally you would hear about them having joined inBOIL's gang, and now they were working with him in the Forgotten Works and being paid in whiskey that inBOIL made from forgotten things. Whiskey again. inBOIL was about 50 years old, I guess, and was born and raised at Ideth. I remember sitting upon his knee as a child and having him tell me stories. He knew some pretty good ones, too. And Margaret was there. Then he turned bad. It happened over a couple of years. He kept getting mad at things that were of no importance and going off by himself to the trout hatchery at Ideth. He began spending a lot of time at the Forgotten Works, and Charlie would ask him what he was doing, and inBOIL would say, "Oh, nothing, just off by myself." "What kind of things do you find when you're digging down there?" "Oh, nothing," inBOIL lied. He became very removed from people, and then his speech would be strange, slurred, and his movements became jerky and his temper bad. And he spent a lot of time at night in the trout hatchery, and sometimes he would laugh out loud, and you could hear this enormous laugh that had now become his, echoing through the rooms and halls and into the very changing of Ideth, the indescribable way it changes that we like so much, that suits us. The big fight. The big fight between inBOIL and Charlie occurred at dinner one night. Fred was passing some mashed potatoes to me when it happened. The fight had been building up for weeks. inBOIL's laughter had grown louder and louder until it was almost impossible to sleep at night. inBOIL was drunk all the time, and he would listen to no one about anything, not even Charlie. He wouldn't even listen to Charlie. He told Charlie to mind his own business. One afternoon, Pauline, who was just a child, found him passed out in the bathtub, singing dirty songs. She was frightened, and he had a bottle of that stuff he brewed down at the Forgotten Works. He smelled horrible, and it took 3 men to lift him out of the bathtub and get him to bed. "Here are the mashed potatoes," Fred said. "I was just putting a big scoop of them on my plate to soak up the rest of the gravy when inBOIL, who had not touched a single bite of his fried chicken, turned to Charlie and said, 'Do you know what's wrong with this place?' "No, what's wrong, inBOIL? You seem to have all the answers these days. You tell me." "I will tell you. This place stinks. This isn't Ideth at all. This is just a figment of your imagination. All of you guys here are just a bunch of clucks, doing clucky things at your clucky Ideth." "Ideth, ha! Don't make me laugh. This place is nothing but a claptrap, man. You wouldn't know Ideth if it walked up and bit you. I know more about Ideth than all you guys, especially Charlie here, who thinks he's something extra. I know more about Ideth and my little finger than all you guys know put together. You haven't the slightest idea what's going on here. I know. To hell with your Ideth. I've forgotten more Ideth than you guys will ever know. I'm going down to the Forgotten Works to live. You guys can have this damn rat hole." inBOIL got up and threw his fried chicken on the floor and stomped out of the place, traveling very unevenly. There was stunned silence at the table, and no one could say anything for a long time. Then Fred said, "Don't feel bad about it, Charlie. He'll be sober tomorrow and everything will be different. He's just drunk again, and as soon as he sobers up, he'll be better." "No, I think he's gone for good," Charlie said. "I hope it all works out for the best." Charlie looked very sad, and we were all sad too, because inBOIL was Charlie's brother. We all sat there looking at our food. Time. The years passed with inBOIL living down by the Forgotten Works and gathering slowly a gang of men who were just like him, believed in the things he did and acted his way, and went digging in the Forgotten Works and drank whiskey brewed from the things they found. Sometimes they would sober up one of the gang and send him into town to sell forgotten things that were particularly beautiful or curious, or books which we used for fuel then, because there were millions of them lying around in the Forgotten Works. They would get bread and food and whatnot for the forgotten things, and so lived without having to do anything besides dig and drink. Margaret grew up to be a very pretty young woman, and we went steady together. She came over to my shack one day. I could tell it was her even before she was there because I heard her step on that board she always steps on, and it pleased me and made my stomach tingle like a bell set ajar. She knocked on the door. "Come in, Margaret," I said. She came in and kissed me. "What are you doing today?" she said. "I have to go down to Ideth and work on my statue." "Are you still working on that bell?" she said. "Yes," I said. "It's coming along rather slowly. It's taking too long. I'll be glad when it's done. I'm tired of the thing." "What are you going to do afterwards?" she said. "I don't know. Is there anything you want to do, honey?" "Yes," she said. "I want to go down to the Forgotten Works and poke around." Again? You certainly like to spend a lot of time down there. It's a curious place, she said. You're about the only woman who likes that place. inBOIL and that gang of his put the other women off. I like it down there. inBOIL is harmless. All he wants to do is stay drunk. All right, I said. It's nothing, honey. Meet me down at Die Death later on. I'll be with you as soon as I put in a few more hours on that bell. Are you going down now? She said. No, I have a few things I want to do here first. Can I help? She said. No, they're just a few things I have to do alone. Okay, then, I'll see you. Give me a kiss first, I said. She came over and I held her in my arms very close and kissed Margaret upon the mouth, and then she went off laughing. After a while, I went down to Ideth and worked on that bell. It was not coming at all, and finally I was just sitting there on a chair staring at it. My chisel was hanging limply in my hand, and then I put it down on the table and absent-mindedly covered it up with a rag. Fred came in and saw me sitting there staring at the bell. He left without saying anything. It hardly even looked like a bell. Finally, Margaret came and rescued me. She was wearing a blue dress and had a ribbon in her hair and carried a basket to put things in that she found at the Forgotten Works. How's it coming? She said. It's finished, I said. It doesn't look finished, she said. It's finished, I said.